How's your hammer? PTDevil here. With Deck Doctors done and over with, I no longer have any long-running series active on my channel, and while I do intend to go back to card reviews eventually, before that I want to try my hand at something else. You may remember a while back I did a review for the Konosuba movie Legend of Crimson, which was perhaps one of the fastest growing videos on my channel in terms of views. While I promised to try my hand at a few more anime reviews, it's been almost a year since that first video went up. Considering this and the absence of Deck Doctors, I can only think of one solution in order to fill in this gap. I am going to do a review of every single episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! Every other week, for a year, every single one. Now, hear me out before cheering or booing me on this. I'm not going to do a full in-depth dive into each episode, that would literally kill me as I still don't make nearly enough money for this. I'm going to do a brief synopsis of each episode, followed by some general thoughts on the story, as well as some fun trivia whenever applicable. If that sounds like fun to you, then sit down with a glass of your favorite non-name brand beverage and come along with me for an adventure full of friendship and unity in PTDevil's Yu-Gi-Oh! Journey. Important disclaimer to prevent comment hemorrhaging. During the course of this series, I will not talk about the following topics unless the show itself contradicts itself on one of those points. Number 1. How screwed up the Yu-Gi-Oh! World is to let a children's card game dictate every aspect of the world's economy, politics, and religions. It has been discussed and talked about by literally everyone. Therefore, it is impossible for me to add to it. Number 2. Differences between the game and the show and the actual TCG. It's a kids show. Changes need to be made to make it more palatable for the kids. Number 3. How this show, and by extension this set of rules, is a clear and blatant ripoff of Suede's Pokemon Journey. I have personally talked to Suede about this months in advance, and he has a free pass to give me a cease and desist at any time. Even if I didn't do that, I'm confident in saying that he's familiar enough with the concept of fair use that I would be fine regardless. Please do not comment on any of the above topics unless you want to look really stupid. So, with that out of the way, let's get started on episode 1. How does the show start off? With one of the most applicable opening themes they could have gone with. Oh, I'm sorry, were you expecting something different? Like maybe dramatic instrumentals, meaningless hieroglyphs, and a Dan Green rap breakdown?
It's time to
demonetize.
Well, guess what? I said I was going to cover every episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! And by obelisk, I mean every episode. So in order to do that, we need to go back. Way back to the very beginning of the series, the Toei anime colloquially known as Season 0. Put simply, there are 27 episodes in Season 0, so at one video every other week, I will finish shortly after the 22nd anniversary of the show's finale, and shortly before the 27th anniversary of me. Yes, this means my birthday is 2 weeks from now, but let's not make a big deal of that. Now, where was I? Oh yes, the intro. While those of you who missed the show may not even heard the show, Kawaita Sakebi, excuse my pronunciation, is perhaps the most fitting song they could have gone with for this franchise. The song itself is fun, bouncy, energetic, and lively, giving the impression of a fun adventure hanging out with your friends. However, the lyrics themselves belie a much darker undercurrent which permeates the cheerful exterior, like there's a dangerous shadow lurking beneath the facade of the lighthearted fun that the song itself provides. This perfectly matches the tone of the franchise, the concept of the main character, and the themes of this series in particular, which, in case you somehow weren't aware, is significantly darker and more twisted than the more well-known incarnations. The song seems to be saying that danger and darkness lurks around every corner and will surely swallow you and everyone else around you. But we can get through it together by sticking together as friends and trying to have fun along the way. It's a very Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy sort of message. Side note, the ending theme is basically the same thing, but is much more relaxed about it. Regardless, with that slight digression out of the way, let's get started on the actual synopsis. We start off in the desert, where we catch up with a group of faceless archaeologists starting their desecration of yet another ancient Egyptian tomb, where they find a mysterious golden box enshrined in an ominous altar. The professor, judging from the others' reaction to him, approaches it and immediately succumbs to the curse. After that heavy dose of foreshadowing, we then hit a wall of extreme tonal whiplash as we cut to Domino High School during lunchtime, where we finally meet our protagonist, a timid and extremely childish boy by the name of Yugi. He finds himself wishing he could play games with everyone else, even though he is too small and weak to be able to play sports like the rest of his classmates. As he muses over this, he decides to console himself by pulling out an ancient artifact which we've already seen someone kill earlier into a Japanese high school. What could possibly go wrong? However, before Yugi can open the Ark of the Covenant, it is snatched by the local bully, Jonuchi. Nail it. Anyway, Jonuchi starts antagonizing the living mustard out of Yugi in order to try to get him to fight back in an attempt to toughen him up, but of course, Yugi dislikes violence, so he declines. At this point, rejected class president and junior custodian, not Tristan, shows up, and true to his future character, does nothing of consequence. Yugi then offers to let Jonuchi take a look inside of the box as long as he doesn't tell anybody about it, and... No, of course that doesn't happen, but Jonuchi appears to be rather unimpressed with the actual contents of the box regardless. But before we can find out what it is, Masaki Anzu shows up, takes the box back from Jonuchi, and takes him to task for bullying those weaker than him. Jonuchi then does the only reasonable thing when confronted by a strong female character, and runs off with Honda under pretense of buying lunch for Miho. Unfortunately, he only succeeds in getting out of the frying pan and into the fire as they come face to face with Ushio Tetsu, the hall monitor and resident hardass. He questions the two about bullying, but thanks to Honda keeping Jonuchi quiet, they manage to escape with just a telling off. Meanwhile, Anzu tries to teach Yugi to stand up for himself once in a while, but of course, Yugi has an ironclad defense. Yeah, because that won't be seen as enablement at all, no sir. Eventually, the topic turns back to the box, and he once again offers to show it to her if she keeps its contents a secret, and... Okay, I'll stop with that now. Of course, it's exactly what we, as longtime fans of the series, knew it was all along, the Millennium Puzzle. He describes it as something you can see but can't see, since you can't see what it looks like since it has never been completed. Get it? Right? Yeah, don't worry, I hate it too. Speaking of things that we all know, Jonuchi reveals that he swiped a piece of the puzzle from Yugi since his treasure stops being a treasure if even one piece is missing. He then throws the piece out of the window and into the canal in frustration. I'll come back to this in the next section. On the way home, Yugi is then approached by Ushio, who has come to believe that he is being bullied by Jonuchi and Honda, which is absolutely true in Jonuchi's case, and immediately appoints himself as his bodyguard in order to protect him. Yugi then tells him that is not necessary and runs home as if the problem has been resolved. Surprisingly, it seems like Anzu beat him there, despite them theoretically leaving at about the same time, as she decided to come over and play with him so that we get quite the introduction to Yugi's grandpa.
いやー、それにしてもあんずちゃん、しばらく見んうちに大きくなって、特に胸じゃ、いよいよ80分の大台って言っても。
Hitting on teenagers a quarter your age is one thing, but doing so to your grandson's childhood friend, whom you've obviously known for years, in front of said grandson somehow makes this 10 times creepier. I just want to know where this came from and who thought this was an acceptable thing to add here. Mind you, it was the 90s, so I guess people just didn't think of that sort of thing. Regardless, Sugoroku then asks Yugi about the Millennium Puzzle, which he apparently heard about from Anzu, trying to dissuade him from completing it. He even goes as far as to go into expositionary monologues about the dangerous powers it supposedly holds, and the ill fates of the archaeological team which discovered it. This works about as well as you would expect it to work on the boy with the emotional maturity of a 10-year-old wanting to make his wishes come true. Later that night, Yugi is still working on the puzzle, which Sugoroku comments is very much like him when he was younger, so he decides to let his grandson solve the potentially world-ending artifact of death and destruction after all. Top-notch parenting there, old man. The next morning, Ushio then brings Yugi back to the dark alley of fun and happiness, where he reveals that he just beat the crap out of Jonuchi and Honda despite Yugi's expressed wishes earlier not to do so. He then decides to beat more crap out of them, which causes Yugi to leap to their defense and proclaim them as his friends, yada yada yada. We all know how this story turns out. Ushio then claims that since he's done his job, Yugi now owes him his bodyguarding fees, which totals to about 200,000? What are you? Oh, right. Yen. I forgot. Well, that's still about $2,000 in US dollars, which is still an astronomical sum for a high schooler. While contemplating his massive debt, Yugi tries to console himself by working on the puzzle, which seems to be coming along now that he's in genuine distress. Plot armor much? Eventually, he gets down to the last piece, which he finally realizing is missing thanks to Jonuchi stealing it without his knowledge, and rushes back to school to try and find it. Jonuchi, for his part, starts to feel guilty about his treatment of Yugi, and due to Yugi still considering him a friend, so decides to try and find the missing piece for him. Unfortunately, Ushio finds Yugi first, and when he doesn't have his car down payment, he decides to become the bully instead and beats the crap out of Yugi. It's almost like he didn't have a problem with bullying to begin with, as long as he was the only one doing it. Cliched schoolyard villain tropes aside, Jonuchi and Honda then confront Ushio after returning the piece to Yugi, and it goes exactly like you'd expect given how soundly they got beat by him just moments before. Then, just as all seems lost, Yugi finally gains enough consciousness to place the last piece of the puzzle into its place, and...
さあゲームの時間だ。なんだこれは。
Honestly, I think the explosion gag would have been less surprising. Not only does completing the puzzle apparently turn Yugi into Beetlejuice, but he also throws in some jigsaw elements as well by teleporting himself and Ushio to the side of the building and forcing him to play a game for his life using the promised bodyguard payment as leverage. The game itself is simple. Each of them takes turn flipping over the Super Magic Stick'em cards and taking steps up the side of the building equal to their value, and each step they take, the other goes down the same amount. The game progresses with Yugi consistently drawing higher value cards than Ushio until the end where Ushio draws the Joker and loses the game. He doesn't take this kindly, of course, and scales the building in order to throw Yugi off the side of the building to his death, even going as far as to tear the rope so that he can't catch himself. So bullying his fellow students wasn't enough for him, so apparently the next step is blatant murder? How does Ushio think he's going to get away with this, might I ask? Well, anyway, the point is moot, as the promised money was just a deck of cards, and the shadow game penalty for cheating causes Ushio himself to fall off the roof as well, while Yugi was able to save himself by jamming the puzzle into the side of the building and hanging off the side of it. Awfully casual with that priceless relic, aren't you, Yami? And you thought that Beetlejuice reference from earlier was just an arbitrary comparison? Nope. Yugi literally summons sandworms out of the canal that swallow him whole. Fortunately, it was revealed to be just an illusion, with him being discovered next morning curled up in the fetal position, terrified out of his mind. Oh, and Yugi and Jonuchi remember nothing about it and are now friends, with Jonuchi parroting the whole seen but can't be seen line to describe their friendship. So happy endings all around, right? Thoughts? This is a classic story for many of us, but boy was it a bit of a roller coaster to see it in this light. For those of us who are longtime fans of the series, it's about as predictable as an ancient Gear player, so coming back to it in this form is dependent on the shock factor of the significantly darker tone of the original story. And considering how infamous this series is within the community, very few of us are coming to this series ignorant of the tonal shift. However, for those of us who did come here not expecting this, the sheer amount of whiplash must have been a wild ride to experience. The antagonists in the later anime were toned down severely in the Japanese version and watered down to almost nothing in the 4Kids dub, but here, all of the antagonists, Jonuchi included, are just evil. They act downright cruel to everyone and anyone around them for no real reason than to cause pain, with selfish gain as a bonus. Even Jonuchi doesn't get a pass because his excuse of trying to toughen Yugi up goes right out the window with the puzzle piece he stole because Yugi had no knowledge of it and therefore had no way of fighting back even if he wanted to. This was just done out of pure spite because he was mad that he called out for being a bully, which he absolutely was. However, while Jonuchi never gets above the level of schoolyard bully, Ushio goes into full-blown criminal territory with unwarranted assault, extortion, and let's not forget attempted murder of a teenage boy. This is a high school student, need I remind you. While we're on the subject, let's talk about Yugi for a second here. There's nothing special about him in the context of shonen anime protagonists, but for some reason they decided to drop about 8 years off of his emotional maturity. While he was never a smooth, suave character to begin with, his childish nature gets ramped up to 11 in this series, to the point where it comes off as a strict flanderization of his personality. Though since this one did come first, it was technically the second series that essentially reversed flanderized him, but that's not the point. This makes his obsessive focus on friendship seem less like a genuine judge of character and more of a combination of youthful naivete and victim blaming. Fortunately, he got really lucky with Jonuchi, but we'll just have to see if this streak carries through for the rest of the series. All that being said though, it's still quite a nostalgia trip to see these classic scenes played out the way they were meant to, and the darker theme can also be a bit of a thrilling change of pace from the squeaky clean image we're used to seeing these characters in. I'm still giving this one 7 stars. Solid standard baseline quality, but not the best this series has to offer either. Trivia. There's a lot to cover here, so I'm just gonna stick to the ones that are most relevant to this episode and try to come back to the rest later. To start with, let's go over the whole that which can be seen but can't be seen nonsense. In the anime, it's just a corny riddle that was used for fun by Yugi and as a callback by Jonuchi. But in the original manga, it's actually something of a recurring element, as it's used by the main cast several times in order to convey a message secretly. Interestingly, while the riddle itself has appeared several times, the answer to said riddle has been different every single time it's used. This is because it's a common riddle in Japan due to its multiple legitimate interpretations that can be altered to fit the situation, kinda like what's black and white and red all over in the West. That being said, I think Rex's interpretation was by far the dumbest, since how the heck is takoyaki supposed to be unseen? Is this supposed to be some sort of Cthulhu reference? While we're on the subject of manga, it's worth noting that Yugi wasn't building a card tower in the manga, but rather playing a game called Bluebeard's Attack, a knockoff of the real-world game Pop-Up Pirate. The reason why this is significant is because in both the anime and the manga, the game that Yugi plays at the start of each episode or chapter is meant to foreshadow the shadow game that's played in the end, and likewise the shadow game of this episode was also changed. In the manga, they played a game called Money and Knife, where each of them takes turn placing a stack of money, totaling double what Yugi owed, on the back of their hand and stabbing through it with a knife. Any bills that stick to the knife they get to keep, but if they stab their own hand, they forfeit their winnings. Again though, Ushio tries to kill Yugi by stabbing him with the knife, saying he can get all the money in one stab, and is likewise subjected to the penalty game which, you guessed it, was also changed. This one actually had a name called Illusion of Avarice, and caused him to believe that the leaves and trash around him were money, where he was found the next day by the other students. This one was not only more fitting than outing him as a coward, which kinda was a bit of a stretch to begin with, it was actually more significant to the series as a whole, as this penalty game was referenced in the real-life Card of Greed, where the exact same thing is shown in the card's artwork. Speaking of Ushio, allow me to address the strong sense of deja vu my 5Ds nostalgics must be dealing with. Ushio is the exact same person as Officer Trudge. Yeah, it turns out that Trudge always had a habit of antagonizing spiky-haired protagonists even when he was in high school. I know this may not be surprising for a lot of you since they both have the exact same name and look very similar, but if you're like me and never saw the Japanese version of 5Ds, it's entirely possible that you could have missed this little Easter egg. Lastly, swinging back to the opening scene, I'd like to point out this throwaway line in the background. This was also in the original manga, but in said manga, the boys who said this also made it very clear that they had an ulterior motive for inviting the girls to play with them. They said that they did so in the hopes of being able to see under the girls' skirts as they took the shots. Yeah, I can see why they decided to cut that. That would have soured the mood completely. Though that does beg the question why they decided to cut that, yet kept Sugoroku's exponentially creepier comment to Anzu about her bust size. Maybe it's because he was an old man and wasn't meant to be taken seriously? However, that's a whole other can of worm zeros to deal with, and I'd rather not delve any deeper into the accompanying theories. This episode was brought to you by my wonderful supporters, supporter, on Patreon. If you'd like to help me out in the same way, please check the link in the description below. I'm currently extending the sign-up date for the Deck Doctor's Destruction Derby, so now is a fantastic time to join. Well, it's been a bit of a rough start, but hopefully next time we can get something a little more thrilling. Anzu was a bit insubstantial too, so hopefully she can start showing a little more of that hotness we saw at the start. Next time on PTDevil's Yu-Gi-Oh! Journey, The Evil Gamer, The Trap of Hell. Wait, is that what I think it is? You can't show that on Yu-Gi-Oh!
Marion, don't look at it. Shut your eyes, Marion. Don't look at it no matter what happens.